back on Play It Forward with J S Mayank, writer director of Week. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It really is a pleasure. JS, I watched your film. It's a powerful film, an important subject. Would you like to introduce yourself or the film in any way prior to getting down to it?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm J S Mayank, the writer and director of Week, which is a dramatic thriller. This is inspired by real events. Our movie opens with a true story told differently. So there was a real life incident that propelled me making this. My lead actress and executive producer, Catherine Castro, actually witnessed somebody taking their life right in front of her when she was at a
Yes.
shooting range. And, it was such an arresting event and it had such a profound impact on her. And she and I have worked previously on other projects, and she told me about this story and said, I think we should do something about this, and talk about what could bring somebody to the brink of suicide, mental health issues. And we wanted to talk about it not in a prescriptive way, not in a, sort of heavy handed, hit you over the head, sort of sob fest. We wanted to take a pretty in-depth and holistic view of how we treat or don't even acknowledge the issues of mental health. It's really interesting how most people, if you have a toothache, you have no problem going to the dentist. If you have a headache, you have no problem get taking an aspirin. But if you are struggling with something in terms of mental health, it's almost taboo to talk about it, to seek help, to go talk to someone. And we wanted to kind of dispel that. And we wanted to take a view of, everyone can struggle with this in some way, shape, or form. And uh the obvious candidates are not always the people who are the only ones who need help. Like, if somebody is telling you they need help, that's fantastic, but often it is the people who will not share their struggles, who will put on a brave front. And that's sort of what our film is really about, an inside look at the world of mental health. And we wanted to do a dramatic portrayal of that.
Thank you for that. I mean, you guys definitely did it. And you've talked about some of the inspiration for it and to, go maybe a little bit deeper or a little bit of a different place in terms of inspiration. The film is called Weak, and it really sets up the misconception and probably one of the reasons why it's so challenging to ask for help because it feels or we've been told or taught that it's a weakness in some way and shape. And, to make a movie like this to challenge that notion and to redefine it is, critical. And to, share in the fact of our shared humanity. I mean, if you haven't been depressed, you're just not human. And if you haven't been hurt and put down, again, you're not living life. So, we all have. And I guess to take, the circumstances and the horrific, personal event that happened to the co-creator of this with you, and then to approach it from this perspective of like what is going on inside a person. Here we have this person who's just a loving, compassionate person who's there for everyone and tries to be there for everyone and really is getting um disrespected in a lot of ways and denigrated, and she's just trying to persevere and not be reactive through it. um I guess, is there anything in that kind of touches upon like what was like the earliest moment in your mind when you were like, okay, I'm going to take this um project and this challenge and I'm going to kind of go here with it? That little
Right.
moment or feeling that you had, can you reflect on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the real life event was Catherine, my actress, executive producer. She plays Audra. She was at a shooting range and she saw this young girl who must have been in her maybe early 20s. And, this was somebody who looked, you wouldn't think anything of it, and then that this like absolutely horrendously tragic event happened right in front of her. And when Catherine and I started talking about it, we said, we didn't want to just tell the story. We wanted to capture that feeling where everybody was saying like, she looked so like she was joking around outside. She was so full of life. We never would have guessed. And that was sort of the feeling we wanted to preserve. And oftentimes, the people who are actually taking care of everybody in their lives, who are sort of, everybody describes them as, oh, that person's a rock. A lot of times those are the people who are trying to keep it above board for everybody else, and yet are, silently struggling on the inside because nobody ever checks up on them. And we felt that's a really important message because so many people feel that they have to, you know, be very firm and strong, hence the title being the opposite of that, that we just tell people, oh, walk it off, like figure it out. And it's such a bizarre notion where, why don't we, everything is either avoidance, let's not talk about it, or it's a band-aid, right? Like, let's just distract yourself, which is sort of what we look at in the film as well. Like, let's not actually tackle the issue at hand. And I feel so much of our society would, we as filmmakers believe would be helped by simply having the conversation, by letting somebody else know, hey, it's okay if you're struggling. Let's talk about it. Let's get some help. Maybe just hearing that you're not alone in this can do a lot for another person, right? So I think it's really fascinating. And you know as a filmmaker, I feel I come from, I like to direct from empathy. And that was one of the things that I also pride myself as an actor's director, and why I feel my cast is always sort of wanting to work with me, because while I love the technical parts of filmmaking and I have an incredible relationship with my cinematographer, my first AD, my production designer, to me, all of those things are sort of like the secondary elements of putting this film together, right? I think the human part of it, which is what is going to connect with people, right? So I really wanted to spend time with my actors talking about, how do we craft these characters? How do we give them depth and nuance, right? So Jen, who is the character played by Bridget Regan, she brought such a beautiful sort of tenderness to that character, whilst also showing this sort of faux persona of being there, being put together. This is why we wanted to shoot in black and white. We almost wanted to make everybody feel, oh, this is picturesque. It's the white picket fence. It's perfection. You see the breakfast table that is just pristine and overloaded, and everything is just in the right place, and we feel this person has everything put together. And for us to realize that that's just the surface. What is happening beneath it? How does she interact with her husband? What is happening with her son, who's a teenager and maybe not really paying attention to what's going on? How she's the one calling her friend, checking on her, going to her house, bringing her food, bringing her flowers, trying to get her out of this tense. And yet, at no point does anybody ever ask, hey, so great, how are you doing? How's your day? And I feel like that commingling of thoughts, of just asking people how they are, how their day is going, I feel people feeling seen is such a big thing that I don't believe we talk about enough in society. And so we wanted to uh demonstrate that visually, and hopefully do so subtly without hitting people over the head.
Yeah, no, that's great. What you said about being seen and appreciated, and we all need that, reciprocity, to support our one another and ourselves. And oftentimes we have to ask for it, if we're
Right.
not getting it. I
Right.
think in terms of the messaging of the movie, which is kind of moving in the next phase of conversation, it's, a huge theme is weak, strong, and in your eyes, and what is the difference between those two? What is weak, what is strong, when, how, in the context of this film?
Yeah, see, to me, what we wanted to play with was that these are all labels. These words are things that, like most things in life, are on a spectrum. And what one person may perceive as strength, may not necessarily be that. It may just be bravado. It may be putting up a front, right? And that the title of the movie is weak, but we end the movie by saying asking for help is not weak, right? So those are the things in terms of our messaging of the movie. Like personally, I love making things that have a message, but I don't like to make message movies. I don't this is why when we crafted our film, we wanted to make it something that does have a thriller component to it, that is sort of a mystery. Everybody's sort of leaning forward, and whenever we've screened the film, people have come up to me and shared a lot of their own personal struggles, a lot of their messages. Our actresses have definitely heard from so many people who've come up to them in tears and sort of speaking about that whole concept of weakness versus strength, and how they see themselves in either Audra or Jen or both of those archetypes, right? Some people have come up and said, oh my God, like I feel I have been guilty of saying things like that to my spouse, to my daughter, to my significant other, to my coworkers, that,
Mm.
oh, knock that stuff off, like just, be
Mhm,
strong, be
mhm,
just
mhm.
figure it out. And in watching this, I've had conversations with people who've said, oh my God, I didn't even realize that I was minimizing somebody else
Right.
or their struggle, or writing that off completely, just because I don't have that experience. Some specific thing doesn't invalidate another person's experience with it. So to bring it all back, we did want to play with the notion of weakness and strength vis-a-vis how do you portray your inner notions. And uh, again, that asking for help, I feel like there is a strength in acknowledging that you are going through something. And if you ask somebody for help, I don't believe there's weakness in it. So it's sort of an ironic title in that we don't want the messaging for people to leave the movie going, oh, if I ask for help, there's something wrong with me. I'm a weak person.
It's not
So
lost.
yeah, but which was a discussion we had. We said, like, look, our poster says weak, is that, and then people read your one line description, somebody who's struggling with depression and is having suicidal thoughts, and your movie's called weak, is that a problem? And I said, well, I think that's a conversation starter, because anybody who agrees, like, yeah, that's weak, if they go and watch that movie, hopefully it will change their mind. And for others, there will be that curiosity, like, what is this? So there's that ironic component to it as well. So I like having work where it makes your audience lean forward rather than sit back, right? I like having that engagement with your audience. So hopefully that's something that comes across, at
You
least
know,
by the
for sure, the irony is not lost in the title and what's going on. Something that comes to me as we're discussing is, socially speaking and maturation wise and growing up in our culture, there's this idea of selfishness and selflessness, and what does that look like, and what is strength and what is weakness in relation, and I think I know in my life I've had to learn how to ask for what I need, learn how to set boundaries, and learn also that that's not selfishness to
No.
do so, you know. So it's always, you know, you got to put on the mask, the oxygen mask on yourself before you can do it on anybody else. And so that work comes internally. And I think that's something you can see that the character may have not been taught or may have not learned,
Absolutely.
you know. And that's something that's so important to learn, the difference between what is selfishness and what's taking care of yourself.
I love your analogy of, if an airplane is going down, you need to put the mask on yourself. As a society, I feel like we really valorize sacrifice for some reason.
Sure.
And I don't think it needs to be at the expense of self, right?
Yeah.
I feel that there are instances where that is important, but that's when it's for the greater good, right? Like, a firefighter running into a burning building. That makes sense. But, like, to put yourself last, to make that a sort of badge of honor, I don't agree that that helps anybody, not the people that you think you're doing it for, and it certainly doesn't help you yourself. So draining your own energy, your own peace of mind, your own sanity, going, running on fumes, you're not going to make it to the destination, at least not in a way that is cogent or helpful to anybody else. So I feel self-care shouldn't be taken as a selfish quality. So I completely agree with you. And in our movie, Jen perhaps is somebody who is guilty of that. She does believe that, you know, putting putting myself last is the way I show my love. And we wanted to speak to that that's not necessarily the healthiest way of going forward. Put you can prioritize people without putting yourself last.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, valorizing this idea of heroism and selflessness. And you said, well, I don't know where it comes from, and it occurred to me, potentially it may come from, a very Christian-dominated society that we live in the West, which is nothing wrong with that. But the idea of Christ as a martyr and martyring himself, this kind of, in our minds, the difference between a sort of overcoming the ego, as self and the dictates of the ego consciousness and that awareness, and then really continuing to take care of our spirit and soul and others. And so that kind of maybe, being a nuance that we are learning as we're all evolving together.
Right. Absolutely.
We got one last question for you, JS. How has your life changed since making the movie?
You know, uh, I've definitely become more self-aware, both in terms of my own processes, of kind of doing that same thing of not valorizing sacrifice, of taking the time of asking people in my life, my family, my friends, my coworkers, if there's something that is bothering me. I've felt communication has really definitely taken a step up, and just sort of the sheer empathetic connection that I've found with so many people, so many messages. My cast has gotten they've been at either a premiere or a different screening at a festival, or just having shown the film, to friends and family, and sort of getting those conversations after, where someone you would have never thought of would ever consider having a conversation about mental health would talk about, oh my god, or getting a message from someone, even from a stranger on Instagram, saying, hey, I just saw your film, and I've had some pretty dark thoughts, and this gave me a lot to think about, that maybe I should talk to someone, and maybe that's not a weakness because I'd been spiraling. Those are things where we just made a movie and it can have a profound effect on someone. And I'm not someone who's like every film needs to change the world. If it can, that's amazing and I love that and I hopefully want to be a part of those movies. But I feel cinema, film, television, all of these forms, they can just be entertainment. But the fact that something like this can make a profound effect on somebody's tangible everyday life is definitely something that has given me a sense of responsibility, that when I am writing my next thing, and we're considering doing a feature version of Week, based off of the response, and people have come up to us and shown interest. And so now I feel that I need to, and me and Catherine and our whole team need to be extra sensitive, deferential, and understanding of what is the thing that is striking a nerve with so many people, and try to do fully portray a three-dimensionalized perspective. In a short film, you don't have that much time to dimensionalize a lot of different characters. So we have a character who is a detective, which is played so expertly by Patrick Husinger. Um, what's the struggle from somebody on the other side who sees the effects of people who are undergoing stressful situations with mental health, who is seeing suicides, who's seeing the aftermath? What does that do to a person? What about the husband character who is being dismissive of his wife? Perhaps he is somebody who is also being put upon by his boss, by his coworkers. He has no way to feel important, so he takes it out on his wife. He takes it out on his kid. So I feel, I pride myself in my empathy, but I think this has made me even more so to double down on human connection, understanding, and really become a better listener and try to pick up on, I've in the last few months, I've had friends who have just casually said, how are you doing? And they'll say, yeah, I'm holding up. I'm
Right.
holding on. And now, earlier I would have just said, yeah, aren't we all? And that would have been the end of it. But now I try to make it a point to say, hey, I don't mean to pry, but if there's anything you would like to have a conversation about, I'm here. And if not, I'm just here to listen. I don't have to offer advice. And that was something that I feel opened the floodgates, where you give somebody the permission to just say, I'm here just to listen. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to give judgment. I'm not trying to fix your problem. If you just need somebody to if you want to be heard, if you want to be seen, right? And it brings it all back to that connection, that asking for help is not weak.
That's beautiful. That's awesome. J S Mayank, raising collective awareness as well as intrapersonal. Thank you, JS, for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Till next time, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you, Costa.
You're welcome.